Welcome to the 2012 Freedom of Expression Forum. Today we have Marta Cooper, Editorial Assistant for the Index of Censorship. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Can we start asking questions?
Go ahead.
Okay.
As you highlighted in the blog relating to the London riots last year, social media was also used in that aftermath to conduct the extensive clean-up operation. Based on this, do you feel this is evidence for social media being a neutral tool that can be used by anybody, or do you believe that in practice the prevalence of new media, particularly social media, does more harm than good?
I don't believe social media does more harm than good. I think it is a neutral tool, and it should be seen as a tool. Whether it creates a good effect or a bad effect is depending on those who utilize it. So, for instance, in the London riots, there was sort of a knee-jerk reaction to the use of BlackBerry Messenger to organise the riots. But then, as I mentioned, Twitter was highly useful for reporters in tracking developments and finding out where the danger spots were. And as you said, social media was also really a force for good in organising the clean-up operation. So I think this is evidence that it can be used for both.
Before I follow on from that, the UK government has been accused of censoring social media sites such as Facebook in an attempt to contain the spread of violence and discord. Many would agree that this arguably utilitarian approach can justify online censorship. Do you feel this is indeed adequate justification of the restriction of freedom of expression, or was it used as a scapegoat for the government to hide the underlying social problems that were the trigger for the riots? And where should the line be drawn in future?
First of all, I don't think that the government ever did censor any websites. I think that was perhaps the reaction was to crack down on social media, but censoring it is not going to remove any problems of criminality. And I don't think it's a solution to the problem. I mean, in the case of the London riots, cracking down on social media is not going to prevent further riots. It's going to make it more difficult to organise. It's an infringement of our right to freedom of expression, but it doesn't get to the root cause of why people were out on the streets looting and rioting.
Okay, I'm going to read my question to you, Marta. It's a long question.
Okay.
So, bridge blogging in Syria and similar regimes is one of the methods used by journalists to circumvent media censorship. Is this a valid role that is played in terms of cultural diplomacy, since it allows the West to better understand these regimes and in many circumstances illustrate how Westerners are actually far removed from the Syria counterparts, as many are led to believe, or are not removed from the Syrian counterparts, as many are led to believe? And secondly, what are your views on this? Is the new modern form of journalism a tool or a good tool in respect of cultural diplomacy?
I think absolutely. In terms of building bridges across the gulfs that divide people linguistically, and from a media point of view, and helping correspondents and journalists understand the countries they're reporting from and the Western audience they're serving. And I think in the case of Syria particularly, citizen media has been shown to be a really indispensable tool, particularly because Western journalists face so much difficulty entering the country. So I think in that case, of course, there have been difficulties in verifying information, and that does become far harder to do when we can't necessarily have the on-the-ground reporters doing their job. But I think it does go some way into turning up the volume and helping a Western audience get a better picture of what's going on.
A better picture, but is this a biased picture?
From Syria?
Well, from Syria, no. My understanding of journalism is to present the facts and all the facts.
Indeed, yeah.
But when you get the bloggers and Twitters, you're presenting one side, or one side of the story is being presented.
Yes.
So this is a totally biased view.
I would say not necessarily. I think it depends on the situation, and by that same token, you could argue that a certain newspaper presents a certain view because they have a certain political agenda. So I think it would have to be seen on a case-by-case basis.
Good answer. Thank you.
To go back to your previous statement, what do you think were the root causes of the London riots?
Wow.
Are you a Londoner?
I do live in London. I'm not from London, but I do live in London. I think the causes were multiple. I think the unemployment rate in the UK, social exclusion, the division between rich and poor were an enormous factor, and I think there's a real sort of disconnect between our political class and wider society, and I think that had some role to play. But I would say that I am not a policy expert. I am not a researcher, so this is just my own personal opinion.
Would you add into that lack of education?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So how can media play a role in bridging this rift between the social classes, especially in microblogging or in the work you do?
I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure necessarily how microblogging on its own can sort of bridge this rift between society and the political class. I think combined with education combined with the government creating more opportunities for young people and really engaging better with the communities they serve, and the police also engaging better with communities, that can help empower citizens to use new media to engage more with their politicians, and it also helps for politicians themselves to engage with the communities they're serving through online media. So, for instance, through hosting online web chats or using Twitter to update their community with what's going on. I think just from a point of view of transparency, it certainly does go some way to helping the situation.
You made an interesting comment in respect to the race riots being sort of fueled by the division between rich and poor. In respect of the riots in London, quite a lot of the ignition was sent by BlackBerry. BlackBerry encrypted messages. BlackBerry is not a tool of the poor people. And what I found interesting from your comment is that you didn't use the words race riots. It wasn't a riot, a race riot, which I do believe, in fact, in quotes, it was.
Well, I didn't mention that because it's not really the topic of my talk. So if I mentioned the riots in London too much, we'd be going into a whole different sphere, and I'm not really in a position to comment.
Okay.
So.
Again, a good answer.
But I would discuss this on another day.
Next question. In this new age of social networking and media, in what way do you think we can step even further forward with technical media, and how can this help with campaigns such as those at Index for Censorship? When I read this, I was thinking more about the Zapatistas. They started their movement when NAFTA was adopted in 1994.
Okay.
And after 2 weeks, they were successful in getting the Mexican army to withdraw because they were using media, social media, and not exactly tweets, but they're able to use other grassroots organizations all over the world to get the Mexican army to withdraw from the conflict.
Right. So your question is, how can organizations such as the one I work for use media to bolster their campaigning?
Yes.
I think a lot of it comes down to having a clear message and engaging with your audience and really sort of understanding what it is that your audience wants, and using tools such as Facebook, which are sort of really good for creating groups and communities of people, and then campaigning that way. It's still very much a work in progress for NGOs to sort of traverse the new media terrain and work out how best to use it for campaigning. But I think just having a presence online and engaging with your audience that way goes some way in the right direction.
Okay. Another question.
I thought there were only 5.
Carry
on.
5 main questions.
Index on Censorship aims to raise awareness on censorship issues, as well as providing support and campaigning for change in those nations that deny their people the freedom of expression. However, is there any point where you think that helping people in such a way can hinder their livelihoods? For example, the enforcement of Western human rights laws on countries that cannot culturally identify with them. If so, what precautions must be taken? What role does cultural diplomacy play in this?
Could you give me an example of the countries where Western human rights values have been imposed?
China, for example, they have a different concept of what human rights is. It's more communal rather than individual.
Yeah. And so what your question is, what can cultural diplomacy do to...
Yes. What must happen for there to be some form of understanding, or in terms to find a bridge between the two differences?
Right. I think a lot of it comes from, I mean, it's very difficult from a journalism point of view when a foreign correspondent is working in China, for instance, and their editor is in London, so there might be a conflict in terms of what the editor wants to cover and what the reporter wants to cover. But I think by engaging, like, there are sort of 500 million netizens online in China, and by engaging more with them and being adept at traversing social and new media and seeing what they're saying, that goes some way to sort of building a bridge from a cultural diplomacy point of view, and also making sure that Chinese content is translated into English for English users. That really sort of alters the traditional Western perception of China.
Do you think the Chinese Communist Party allows these netizens to continue their microblogging because it allows them an avenue for venting their concerns or troubles?
Well, past cases have shown that in episodes of social unrest or particularly sensitive moments, such as the train crash in Wuhan last summer, social networks were clamped down upon to sort of quell the unrest and sort of maintain public sentiment. But the Chinese Communist Party is very well aware that netizens are using microblogging platforms such as Weibo, which is China's version of Twitter, not necessarily to express dissent, but just to express themselves. And they engage with them as well through online chats and these sorts of things. So on the one hand, you do have sort of the Chinese censorship, which does clamp down on certain discussion, but then the Chinese media also uses the web very widely to gauge public sentiment.
Okay, thank you for.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.